Today we'll be looking at a hostage crisis, one in which two bank robbers go on the run with their hostages for days. During this time they hijacked a bus full of people and crossed the border into another country. How could such a thing happen? Well, there are two reasons. The first is ill-prepared police. You probably guessed that one. I mean, how do you just let the bad guys take even more hostages and then leave the country? Well, it wasn't all the police's fault. The second reason is overzealous journalism. The media followed these guys around everywhere, and at times it hampered the police's efforts. They conducted interviews while the hostage crisis was still ongoing, and one journalist even got in the car with the captors to provide directions. So how did all this play out? Let's see. It's August 16th, 1988 in Gladbeck, West Germany. Two men entered the Deutsche Bank before opening hours. One of them is Hans-Jürgen Rösner, a man who has spent large portions of his life in prison and feels he has little left to lose. Accompanying him is Degowski. Can already tell this episode will see the continuation of my rich tradition of looking up every name pronunciation and still fucking it up. Reportedly the less composed and more dim-witted of the two, Degowski served as somewhat of a lackey for Rösner, though he had a criminal past of his own. With guns drawn, they threatened the bank staff, but within minutes, police arrived, and a standoff ensued. After hours of negotiations, the police agreed to hand over several 100,000 Deutschmarks in cash and a car in which the two would be allowed to get away. That night, the two hopped into the car and drove off. Unfortunately for the police, they had brought two hostages from the bank. Well, I say unfortunate, but it was their own fault really. Why give them the keys before making sure they're not bringing the hostages with them? Why not have the car specially rigged for easy recapture? All you had to do was empty most of the fuel. The pair drove through the night and into the next day. 230 kilometers from Gladbeck was Bremen. Here they picked up Rösner's girlfriend, Marion Lublik. How was that allowed to happen? Were the police even tracking this car? Did they just lose interest once they left the bank? I'm certainly not an expert in hostage scenarios, but it seems like letting more people become involved in the crime unopposed is kind of a failure. While in Bremen, they decided to ditch the car for another one. After several failed attempts at getting another car, they hijacked a bus with over 30 passengers on board. Why was any of that allowed to happen? What were the police doing? If they were planning to act once the captors were on the bus, it was too late. Journalists swarmed the bus, throwing water on any ideas the police might have had on a rescue mission. Although I'm sure that's a fire that wasn't getting much oxygen anyways. The robbers gave a little press conference, guns in hand, and the media gladly obliged them, unbelievably conducting interviews with them during the hostage crisis. Some even got on the bus for better pictures. Eventually though, they were back on the Autobahn, this time heading for Hamburg. They stopped at a service station and let the two bank hostages go. Marion Lublik went to the toilet. The police decided now, of all times, was the time to strike. Without contacting or informing the central office, the police apprehended Lublik and put her in cuffs. You can probably see why that's a bad idea. Lublik was an accomplice for sure, but it's not like she was the one masterminding the scheme or putting guns to hostages' heads. She was just along for the ride because she was Rösner's girlfriend. To capture her while the two actual armed lunatics are still in command of over 30 hostages is disastrous decision making. You've gained very little and aggravated the hostage takers a lot. Of all the times you could have stepped in and taken decisive action, this is what you went with? Of course, the men were furious. They issued the police an ultimatum. If Lublik was not returned to them within the next few minutes, they would start killing hostages. Of course, the police were forced to concede. What did they think would happen? Unfortunately, they fucked this part up as well. They had trouble with the handcuff locks and had missed the deadline before releasing Lublik. 15-year-old Italian boy Emanuele Di Giorgi was shot in the head. He bled to death. By the early hours of the next day, the bus had crossed the border into the Netherlands. Rösner and Degowski negotiated a trade with police. They gave up the bus in exchange for a car. They took two hostages from the bus with them, 18-year-olds Silke Bischoff and her friend Ines Volk. A few hours later, they were back in West Germany, heading for Cologne. Stopping in Cologne, the group is once again surrounded by eager journalists. The interviews continue as Degowski holds a gun to Silke's throat for the cameras. The stress-filled days on the run, driving non-stop, is clearly taking its toll on the men. And although the massive media attention and crowd surrounding their car only seems to agitate them further, the journalists are only too eager to interact with the bank robbers. They offer them food, drink and advice. Journalist Udo Rubel stands at the front, talking with Rösner. He can sense the robbers' nerves are starting to fray and pushes the rest of the crowd back when they get too close, trying to calm the situation. Eventually, it all becomes too much for Rösner, who exits the vehicle, pointing his gun at the crowd. He orders them to back off and asks Rubel for the quickest way to the Autobahn. As Rubel gives the directions, Rösner grows impatient and asks him if he'd prefer to just get in and show them the way. Incredibly, Rubel agrees and he's squeezed in the back beside Silke. That probably would have been a good time to ask if he could just take the poor girl's place, but these are journalists we're talking about. Rubel led the captors to the Autobahn, and about 40 minutes later, they let him off at a service station. "My work here is done." However, just a few kilometers down the road, the police decided to act again. They ambushed the robber's car and rammed it from the side, immobilizing it. A gunfight broke out, but soon, Rösner, Degowski and Lublick were all under arrest. In the chaos, Ines had escaped into a ditch, but Silke Bischoff had received a fatal shot to the chest, thought to be from Rösner's gun, and died at the scene. After 54 hours, the hostage crisis was over, and 2 were dead. Rösner and Degowski received life sentences, while Lublick was sentenced to 9 years, though she only served 6. Dieter Degowski was released in 2018 after serving 30 years in prison. He was given a new identity upon release, under which he now lives in anonymity. Hans-Jürgen Rösner is still behind bars. The media was criticised harshly for its involvement in the hostage crisis, although no one was pursued legally. In my opinion, bit of a missed opportunity to not make examples out of these fuckers. I mean, technically some of them did assist the criminals and their combined presence hindered police. Surely you could get some convictions out of that. Instead, the German Press Council banned journalists from interviewing hostage takers in ongoing hostage situations. I feel like that's probably something you shouldn't need to be told, but once again, journalists. They take whole classes on ethics in college and then come out like, how was I to know I shouldn't insert myself into a hostage situation? There was nothing to explicitly forbid me from doing so. If you'd like more examples of the German media making a balls of things, why not check out my video on Hitler's diaries? That's a crazy story. And if you'd like to hear about another bank robbery turned hostage situation, check out my video on the Stockholm bank robbery, which is where the term Stockholm Syndrome gets its name. And if you'd like to see even more crazy, bizarre and hilarious events, subscribe and you'll hear about one every week. And until next week, I'll see you next time. No, that doesn't make sense.